Death of a naturalist. Now, let me tell this to you right at the beginning. Sit with your book, your textbook, with a pencil and perhaps a notebook. In any case, you have my notes because this is a complex poem. Okay, it may seem very simple, chota sa poem hai, do stanza ka poem hai, but it is a complex poem. So I am going to go through a little slowly, explaining first the context to the poem. Okay, so that you understand कि ये कहां पर सेट की गई है, because the background matters a lot as far as this poem is concerned. In fact, I would say all the poems of Rhapsody are pretty complicated, and it's only going to get more complex when you go to class 12. So, Death of a Naturalist, part of your Rhapsody textbook. So, before we go, this is the cover of the book when it was published by Seamus Heaney in 1966. This is the poet. Okay, and he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in the year 1995. He passed away in 2013. So in that sense, quite a contemporary poet in that sense, writing about the world of the 20th century and today. Okay, so in that sense, he's not like, William Shakespeare writing about a very old world, but pretty much the world of the 20th century. Now, what is this poem all about? The poem essentially focuses on the flax. This is a blue color flower. In fact, what I will do is that I'll keep talking about the poet and then I will come to and keep showing you the photograph so that in your visual memory, you'll be able to relate to it better, and that will make it easier for you to understand the poem, because that's very important. If you just read the words as are there in your textbook, somehow I feel unless you have a visual connect, which is possible in a poem like this, I can't possibly do that in a poem like Sonnet 116, right? So when you are able to visually connect to a poem, it will make your job and my job that much easier in order to understand the poem. Now, Seamus Heaney, as I said, was a Nobel Prize winning Irish poet. All this is in the notes. I've taken it from the notes only. The poem was published in 1966 with the title poem of Death of a Naturalist. I will talk about the title a little later. Okay. And this was Heaney's first book of poetry. The book and the poem established Heaney as one of the foremost Irish poets of his generation, and he was called a farmer poet. And this is interesting. Again, as I said, to know the background of the poet becomes that much more important, since many of his poems revolved around farms, including this one. In fact, he described his childhood as an intimate, this is from his book, his own words, as an intimate physical creaturely existence, talking about the flora and fauna in suspension between the archaic and the modern. Archaic means the old world and the modern. So, his poems, his childhood, his poems reflect his childhood, and his childhood was full of this, a lot of physical activity, intimate with nature, and that's why he's known also as a farmer poet, because he was talking about the natural surroundings and kind of revolving between, oscillating between the old world and the modern. Now, this is an interesting aspect that I picked up. His younger brother died in 1953 at the age of 4, and this had a very deep effect on the poet's psyche. And in his writing, where he explored the loss of innocence, including this one, Death of a Naturalist, there is the exploration of the loss of innocence. यानी कि जो बचपन में जो एक तरह की मासूमियत होती है, I hope you can understand. In any case, I've explained it in English. I'm just explaining it for those who may be more comfortable understanding it in Hindi. कि जो बचपन में जो मासूमियत होती है, उसके खोने का किस तरह का दर्द होता है, उस थीम को भी इस पर्टिकुलर पोएम में एक्सप्लोर किया गया है. Now, this is another interesting aspect that I found from a critic, that the book was published in 1966, and that was the year he became a father also for the first time, and that may have prompted him to think about his own childhood, as is the case with Death of a Naturalist. Okay, so that's about the poet. What is the poem about? It is the relationship between human beings and nature. Okay, and here the frogs, in a sense, represent the fauna, the nature in this particular poem. The poet uses that relationship between human beings and nature to explore the transition from childhood to adolescence. That is, he uses nature as some kind of a tool, as some kind of a medium, wherein he talks about the transition from the innocence of childhood to the more, let's say, a slightly more mature self of adolescence period. Now, as the speaker grows up, his relationship with nature, not to nature, with nature changes. Instead of enjoying the natural world with innocent curiosity, he finds that threatening and disgusting. And that's what happens in the second stanza. The first stanza is about his childhood. The second stanza is when he has grown up, when he finds the same nature who he used to find, that he used to find extremely captivating and interesting. Now he finds it very threatening. Now, what is the theme of the poem? The theme of the poem is the loss of innocence. These are important key phrases that you need to use in your answers. Of course, when I write the question and answers, I will write that. But in the notes, all this is there. So these are important keywords जिसका कि इस्तेमाल you need to make in your answers. The loss of innocence and the transition from childhood to adolescence. That's why I'm also repeating it, so that the more times you hear it, it kind of gets embedded in your software. The poem is set in a flag stem, and I'll tell you what a flag stem is. A boggy area of water where the speaker used to spend time as a child. This is based in Ireland, as I said. Ireland is to the north of England. Exploring the creatures that lived there, mainly the frogs and the frog spawn. In the first stanza, the speaker describes his fascination. We'll just talk about what do the two stanzas, so that agar aapko, because as I said, it's a complex poem, it will make more sense for you to know what is there in the poem before we dive into the poem straight away. The speaker describes his fascination with the tadpoles, the frog spawn essentially, in the dam, and his delight in watching them change and grow up. Okay. However, and that's his connection with nature. However, in the second stanza, the speaker's relationship to the dam and its creatures changes. He is now aware of the darker side of the same frogs of nature and is filled with fear and disgust. The poem ends with the speaker running away from the dam, symbolizing his rejection of childhood innocence and his entry into a more adult world. When I talk about this thing, when we are children, we kind of relate to certain things with a lot of innocence because we are not aware of any other darker side to it, right? But as we grow up, we kind of realize that, it is not as innocent. Let me take a very basic example. Chor police ka khel khelte hain sabhi bacche, right? But as you grow up, at that time, it sounds very fascinating. You don't mind being the chore and being caught by the police. But as you grow up, you realize the perils of being a chore. You wouldn't want to be a thief when you grow up in the adult world. You realize that it is something wrong. You realize it's not something which is to be done. So, I'm just giving a very basic example to kind of make you understand that what seems innocent in childhood may not seem as innocent when you are in the mature adult world, when you have grown up. Okay? Okay, आगे चलते हैं. Now, the transformation of frog spawn, which is a source of delight and curiosity when he was a child in the first stanza, into menacing, that is very dangerous looking adult frogs, marks the end of childhood innocence and the beginning of a more complex understanding of the world, right? And life in general. The education and the learning. This is the second theme, the education and the learning. Formal education. In fact, there is a reference to one of his teachers in school, Miss Walls, and the informal he learns through direct exposure to whatever is there at the flag stamp. Okay, so there is a formal education that he gets in school, the informal education where he is in direct contact with nature itself and he's able to see a lot of life kind of unfolding. So it brings to the poet a deeper but frightening understanding of nature, because जब आप books में पढ़ते हैं, you just read the black and white text out there. You may at best have a couple of photographs, but when you see the same nature up close and personal in all its glory, to the naked eye, raw, unrefined, when you see it, when you can see it, touch it, smell it, you get a deeper understanding of nature, which is why they always say, it's very important to go on field visits to a place, because when you go on a field visit, you get to see what things are like in reality. Nature cycle, both beauty and terror coexist. So these are the three broad themes of this particular poem that you need to know before we get into it. Now, what is the setting of the poem? Now, let's get to the setting of the poem. What is flax? Now, flax is a blue colored flower plant that is cultivated for its seed, linseed. Okay, so this is what I said. This is a blue color plant, and this is linseed, which is also consumed. It's considered good for health, especially because it is rich in fiber, calories. So linseed also, a tablespoon or a couple of tablespoons is considered good to be consumed also on a daily basis. So this is linseed. But there in Ireland, it was cultivated for its seed and for textile fiber made from the stalks of the particular plant. It is like long kind of stalks, उसके ऊपर ये flowers आते थे, तो उस stalk से, that is stem से, you would kind of use it for textile, for making linen. It is a plant from which linen is manufactured. It is sown in the spring and harvested in the summer. This is just basic background I'm telling you so that you are aware of it. The purpose of placing them in a flax dam was to rot the stem, so that वो stems एक तरह से गल जाते थे. Okay, they would kind of rot out there and expose the fiber from which linen is made. Okay, I'll show you one more photograph that gives you an idea about. Sorry. Are you able to see this photograph? So this photograph shows you how that in the dirty swamp slush out there, the plants are put, and from there they would be rotting. What you are seeing is a very rotting kind of a photograph, and from there it will be taken out and they would be using it for growing of linen. Now, subsequent to this, the other thing is that what is a flam? Now, it is a large pond which gets its water from an adjacent stream. These are all words which are used in your poem, which is why I'm explaining them beforehand, so that before you get into it, you know the basic background. The linen industry flourished in Northern Ireland till the 1950s, when it was taken over by synthetic fiber. Now, let's come even to the story of the poem. Now, the swamp near the town decomposes all through the year. The poet describes all that he saw there: rotting flax, bubbles, swamp area, the bottle flies, the butterflies, everything, dragonflies. But the poet was interested only in the frog eggs, which is known as frog spawn. Now, this is frog spawn, not a very beautiful looking thing. Okay, but the poet finds it extremely fascinating. Okay, this is the first step in the life cycle of a frog. So this is what he used to find when he was a child there at the swamp, at the flax dam. Okay, so he would collect them, put them in a jar, in a jam bottle, and leave them out there on his school window, or at home he would leave them till they became into tadpoles. From frog spawn to tadpoles, and then they become adult frogs, mendak. Now, his teacher had taught them about the life cycle of the frog. So he is doing something like a practical demonstration experiment in order to understand the life cycle firsthand better. The second part of the poem is a contrast to what happens in the first part. One day, angry frogs invade the swamp. Poet heard a raw, loud croaking he had never heard before. He felt threatened, intimidated. That is, he got scared. Array, why is it kind of increasing the size? He ran away. He called them the great slime kings and felt they had gathered there for revenge, because he had taken away the frog spawn. So perhaps, I mean, that's the only logical explanation why they were coming to attack him. And why did he feel that they were there for revenge? He feared that if he would put his hand into the water, the frog eggs would not let him take it out. The two stanzas, therefore, are complete contrast to each other. The first is full of positivity, okay, and delight and fascination. The second brings fear and intimidation as a menacing male frog invade it with belligerence. In the sense, I've used a word like this deliberately because I want you to use these kind of words in your answers to make them sound better, read better. That is, with a lot of gussa, with a lot of growth, with a lot of aggression, they come to attack him and he feels very scared and intimidated. Okay, I hope यहाँ तक का समझ में आ गया without getting into the poem. Poem का पूरा basic सार समझ में आ जाए तो easy होगा इसको समझने में. What is meaning of the title of the poem? Now you're talking of death. of a naturalist. Now, someone who is in connect with nature, you would think that that's a nice way to live, right? Why are we talking of death? And that's interesting because a naturalist is an expert or student of nature. That's the basic definition of naturalist. No one dies in the poem, so it's not as though someone is actually dying in the poem, but so it cannot be about the literal death of a naturalist. So the meaning is metaphorical. A naturalist can die if he loses his interest in nature. This is the key line, and that's precisely what happens in the first line. In the first stanza, the poet is completely in love, he's enamored of nature, but in the second stanza his view completely changes. He's no more interested, his love affair with nature snaps, and that is the death of a naturalist. Okay, so can be seen as the death of innocence of childhood. That's the basic meaning of the title of the poem. Okay, so I'll show you a couple of more photographs. So this is what he sees, and he feels threatened by, intimidated by, and attacked by when he sees these angry frogs coming to attack him, and that happens in the second stanza. समझ में आ गया यहां तक? Okay, so now let's get started with the poem itself. एक है से गगन के तले जहां गम भी न हो, आंसू भी न हो, बस प्यार ही प्यार पले. All year the flag stamp festered in the heart of the townland, green and heavy-headed. Flax had rotted there, weighed down by huge sods. Daily it sweltered in the punishing sun. Now, if you see these kind of lines, as I said, a flax dam is a small pond or swamp where farmers soften the flax by weighing them down with huge sods. And huge sods essentially are huge lumps of grass and mud. यानी कि उसका भार नीचे लाने के लिए, to weigh them down, they use these huge lumps of sods, weighed down by huge sods. The process which is followed in the pond, is called retting, and you would have read this in your geography in ICSC class 10 for sure. Okay, now the farmers, what they do is that वो अपने फ्लैक्स को उस स्वैम्प पर कई हफ्तों कई दिनों के लिए वहां पर छोड़ देते हैं ताकि वो गलता रहे. रॉटिंग मींस गलने का, हिंदी में the word is galna. Okay, now so what happens is that when something is constantly rotting is what basically it is getting spoiled. Retting is the word of kind of process followed in the pond is called retting, but basically they are left there to rot. जब rot होता है तब एक तरह की बदबू आने से लग जाती है. So the entire place is actually a stinking kind of place. It's not a good pleasant smell. So therefore a flax dam is essentially a stinking kind of a place. Okay, so flax had rotted there and huge sods के साथ उसको नीचे weigh down किया जाता था. Now the flax dam festered. Festered is another word. Now I'm sure you are noticing the alliteration which is being used out here. Quite a lot of alliteration which will be here. Sweltered sun. Okay, so he is saying that the flax dam festered. Festered, it conveys what? Festered means it conveys a sense of decay. Okay, it conveys a sense of decay. Rotting is again conveying a sense of decay. गलने का मतलब है एक तरह से खराब हो जाना, एक तरह से it is getting from a good shape to a bad shape. Townland is a local term. Townland, it does not necessarily convey a town. In Ireland at that point in time, it was a term which was used to describe the farm, यानी कि जो खेत है, and whatever was owned by the farmer, that was known as the townland. But the fact that it is being said that it is in the heart, it shows that it is an important kind of a place. It shows its importance within the entire area, the region. Now, flax is a plant which, as I said, is grown for its seed, also for its oil, and the basic thing is for the linen. Heavy-headed means large headed. It would kind of, it's a very dominant kind of head, and weighed down means burdened. So the poem is essentially starting in the past of the poet. अपने बचपन की बात कर रहा है, जब एक hot sun, the punishing sun conveys, extreme heat at that point in time, bright sunshine is beating down on the dam, it's the area of the watery swamp. Now, sweltered का मतलब क्या है? बहुत ज्यादा पसीना आ रहा है, sweltering heat बोलते हैं ना, when it is extremely hot and you feel you are perspiring a lot. So sweltering also conveys a sense of extreme what? Discomfort. काफी तकलीफ हो रही है. At that point in time, the flax was releasing bubbles, and bubbles, when they indicate what? It indicates that the swamp is also relatively quite deep, and there are bottle flies flying around. After the next line, there are bubbles gargled delicately. Blue bottles wove a strong gauze of sound around the smell. Now, this is an interesting kind of an oxymoron which has been used. Bubbles gargled sound. It's not a very pleasant kind of sound, right? But bubbles gargle. Bubbles are something which are very delicate. So it's almost like an oxymoron which has been used. But more importantly, the talk of the blue bottles. Now, blue bottles are is a fly which is known as a carrion fly, which means it kind of feeds on the dead bodies, okay, and decaying plants and dead animals. So in that sense, it is a symbol of death. Blue bottles is extremely important because it is a symbol of death out there in this particular poem. So blue bottles, so right at the beginning, the sweltering sun, the blue bottle's presence, everything kind of conveys that it's almost like, he's preparing us for something with negative which is going to come up later part of in the latter half of the poem. So the blue bottles flies are a symbol of death, and they kind of convey, see, on the flax stem there is a lot of vibrant light, there is a sun, there is bubbles, and there is a lot of activity happening there because the plants are decaying and they will be used by the farmers. The farmers have done a lot of work, but the presence of the blue bottles flies are a contrast. वो एक तरह का opposite meaning is being conveyed by the presence of the blue bottle flies to the vibrant life at the swamp as a result of the activity by the farmers. Okay, so you see what you are getting is a lot of imagery, visual imagery, sound imagery. The blue bottles presence, the sound that they create, and wove a strong gaze of sound around the smell. They also create a lot of sound. They are creating some kind of a maze of sound. It's almost like, the sound which has been created by the blue bottle flies, itna zor se they are creating the sound that it is almost like a net. It's almost like a fabric around the place that you constantly, there are some places you see where you would go, and if there are a lot of mosquitoes, etc., you would constantly keep on hearing the sound, right? So it's almost like a continuous audio track which is going on, continuous soundtrack which is going on, right? So that is the kind of an sound effect that has been created at this particular place. The word gauze is essentially used for something which is very thin, a very thin fabric. Again, by using it for sound, it's almost like meaning to say that it's almost like a fabric which is there all over the place, which is like, wrapped around. The sound has kind of wrapped around the place. The moment you reach the place, you see the visual, but you also hear this kind of continuous, uninterrupted kind of a sound. So if you get a question about the use of imagery, you need to point out all these, the visual imagery as well as the sound imagery. You can also talk about the sense of touch a little later in the poem. Okay, now the blue bottles being associated with death I've already spoken about, right? But they're also responsible for pollination. So in that sense, it's a duality. Life as well as death, they seem to kind of be associated with at the same time. Now the language, festered, rotted. What do these two words convey? Apart from blue bottles, they convey death and decay. Festered, rotted, and the presence of the blue bottle flies. Heart, I've already said that it is of the importance of the townland to the entire region where nature and man seem to coexist. Sweltered, in the punishing sun, in the sense as though the sun is kind of punishing the swamp out there. There is a bit of a, when you're sweltering means almost as if somebody is punishing sun. So it's almost like, something bad is going to happen. It's kind of preparing us for the twist in the poem a little later. And of course, the alliteration, flax, festered, strong, sound, smell, there are a lot of this kind of swords. They're all there. Okay. Yeah. I'm going a little slowly because, as I said, thoda sa mushkil poem hai ye. There were dragonflies, spotted butterflies, but best of all was the warm, thick slobber of frog spawn that grew like clotted water. The frog spawn, जिसका की photo मैंने पहले दिखाया. Now, इसमें he is describing nature in great detail. The blue bottles, the dragonflies, the spotted butterflies, and the frog spawn. So he's kind of showing all that, but he's saying that of all these things, the poet was most fascinated by the frog spawn. The frog spawn, from which the next stage is that of the tadpoles. So as we saw it, it doesn't look very great. It looks pretty gross, but he's quite fascinated by that particular sight. Now, slobber is also used as a word for the saliva that drops from the mouth. But that's precisely also that viscous. It's a very viscous kind of a texture, the frog spawn, what it looks like. And the frog spawn also represents the cycle of life and death, that it is the first stage of the life cycle of a frog. From there, it becomes a tadpole, from a tadpole to an adult frog. But the fact that the poet is interested and fascinated by the sight of the frog spawn, so much so that he collects it and puts into a jam bottle, it kind of shows his own innocence, that he's interested in exploring life like that. So it shows a certain amount of innocence at that point in time. Now, what does he do with the frog spawn? Okay, in the shade of the banks. Here, every spring, what he would do is to fill jam bottlefuls. Now, jam potfuls, since he has put this in plural, it kind of conveys that he does it in lots of jam pots. It's a word that Heaney seems to have figured it out himself, as a word generally se pehle nahi tha. Of the jellied, specks to range on window sills at home. Okay, so what he would do is that he would put them on window sills at home or on the shelf at home. He would fill the jam bottles with frog spawn and he would carry it and put it on the shelf at school, or he would put it on the window sill pe. He would put it out there. Okay, so specks means tiny spots or particles. Until the fattening dots burst into nimble swimming tadpoles. Nimble means something which has a very quick movement. So he would wait and do that till such time when the fattening dots, dhire dhire, they would grow and become into fast moving swimming tadpoles. That is, they could swim in water. So he would wait till that stage actually occurred. And then he talks about his school and his teacher at school. Okay, so the fact that he's kind of very keen and a very keen observer and a curious observer of the way the frog spawn transforms into tadpole. So he's interested in the life cycle of the frog in that sense. And fattening obviously indicates that they are gaining in strength. Now the poet remembers that how his teacher, Miss Walls, had taught us about the daddy frog was called a bullfrog, and how he croaked, and how the mammy frog, the mummy frog, laid hundreds of little eggs. He also is showing the very Irish influence, because in Ireland was where words like daddy frog and mammy frog were used quite there. So it's showing, he's displaying his Irish influence by talking about that. So he speaks about this is what used to happen. The mammy frog used to lay hundreds of little eggs, and this was frog spawn which he used to collect in jam bottles, and you could tell the weather. And what was significant is that just by looking at a frog, you could tell the weather, for they were yellow in the sun. When it was bright sunlight, they were yellow, and they were brown when it rained. Now, as compared to, I'm not saying the rain is always a negative kind of metaphor, but as compared to sunshine, the rain is taken as some kind of a negative metaphor. Okay, so but it's insignificant that you could, just by looking at the frog and the color of the frog, you could make out whether it is summer or whether it is the monsoon season. Now, with this, we come to the end of the first stanza. Now, the second stanza is where the mood completely transforms. Then one hot day, the first one was talking about spring, right? When fields were rank with cow dung in the grass, the angry frogs invaded the flag stamp. So now he's talking about invaded. He has given us some kind of hint by talking about sweltering and punishing sun. But now he's talking about invaded and the blue bottle flies. So he's saying that now when he sees the sight of the angry frogs in the same flax dam, the word rank, that then one hot day when fields were rank with cow dung, the word rank suggests that the fields are filled with the smell of cow dung, which again is not a pleasant smell at all. It's that of rotting manure, which gives you again a stinking kind of feeling, an unpleasant kind of an odor. Invaded is a very powerful kind of word because it now says that the frogs, till now, frogs, spawn and tadpoles were seen almost as allies, as friends of the poet. But the moment he sees the angry frogs, he's talking about them invading. He sees them as a potential threat. उसको एक तरह से लगता है कि वो तुमको धमका सकते हैं, वो एक तरह का खतरा बन सकता है from the same frogs. So it suggests that they're aggressive, they're also extremely hostile towards you. So the speaker's reaction towards the same frog, I ducked through hedges. Hedges means some kind of bushes. Okay, to a coarse croaking that I had not heard before. Coarse means something which is very rough, not a very pleasant kind of sound. Frog ka croaking in any case is not a very pleasant kind of a sound, as you may be aware. So he's saying, I ducked. I ducked immediately means, main jhuk gaya, because he's scared. He has got intimidated by the hostility and the aggression of these angry frogs. So the speaker's reaction is one of fear. He's also a little disgusted by the coarse croaking that I had not heard before. Isse pehle he had, even though the place was a stinking place, he had a particular fascination for the innocence of the frog spawn, thereafter moving into the tadpole stage. But this angry frogs and their coarse croaking is something which he had never heard before. So this was a new thing for him, and he got very scared and intimidated by that. Okay, so they are making a sound which is not familiar to the poet, and the sound is described as coarse, which, as I said, is unpleasant, it's loud and extremely rough. The fact that the speaker has not heard that sound before, this is important. The fact that उसने ये इस तरह की आवाज पहले नहीं सुनी, जो कि काफी कठोर किस्म की croaking है by the मेंढक, it also suggests that it is not something which he's used to, and it's a sign, more importantly, it is a sign that these frogs are different from what he had imagined they would be, because he was used to, in his mind, he was always used to the niceties and the innocence of the frog spawn. Dekhne mein, whatever it looks like, though I think it looks pretty repulsive, he for whatever reason found it very beautiful. He used to kind of revel in that, filling it in and taking it home, taking it to his school, etc. But now this is something which he had not accounted for. So the speaker is now slowly kind of getting exposed to what is the darker side of nature, of wild nature, right? With angry frogs. And he's able to understand कि दुनिया में सब कुछ सुंदर नहीं है, and that is something which you will also learn. It has a lesson for each one of us. When we are children, we look at everyone. Someone says something nice about you, you immediately think, वो अंकल कितने अच्छे हैं, मेरी तारीफ की, मेरे को बोला कितना सुंदर बच्चा है, मैं कितना अच्छा बच्चा हूँ, right? But later on in life, you will realize that the same nice talk may not necessarily be what that person actually thinks about you, right? That in life, a lot of things are a put on. So you get exposed to the reality of life as you move on in life. As you grow older, you get exposed to different kinds of environments, be it at home or be it, much more importantly, outside in the work environment. in the world outside, right? So you realize that life is not what it seems. I'll give you an example. You go in the metro, right? Looks plush, looks great and great, देखने से सब अच्छा लगता है. बट किसी दिन सुबह 10 बजे या शाम के 6 बजे ऑफिस क्राउड के साथ आने की कोशिश कीजिए, where everybody is trying to rush in. Nobody cares whether I'm pushing you in or kind of putting pressure on you to get inside or abusing somebody. And that time you realize that this metro crowd is not as nice as I always thought it is. So what is not when you get exposed to the darker and the uglier side of things, right? I'm just giving it a very different kind of comparison to make you understand better. Okay. Now the air was thick with a bass chorus. This is pronounced as bass. Okay. Now he's saying that the air is thick. Again, just like in the word gaze, he's using the word thick to kind of thick with the bass chorus. With the sound thing, he's like so many frogs croaking at the same time. I don't know whether you have ever stayed in a village during the monsoon. If you have, you will realize that you will hear in the evening and especially at night, you will hear a lot of frogs croaking. Okay, if it is raining in the night especially, you will keep hearing frogs croaking. Craw, 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 craw. And uske piche मेंढक को खाने के लिए सांप भी आ जाता था. Okay, I have lived, so I know what I'm talking about. So you will hear this constant chorus of the croaking of frogs, and that's what he's calling it thick. So when you're talking about the sound imagery, these two words, the gaze and thick, these kind of are conveying this sound imagery, being almost enveloping the entire place with the sound. Okay. Now, so it is a very loud, it's very aggressive, it's very pervasive, and it kind of creates the impression कि पूरा एक तरह से cover कर दिया of a whale. The word bass conveys that it is a low sound, crong, 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 crong. It kind of continuously goes on. So it's not a very loud, it's loud definitely because of so many frogs croaking, but it's also in terms of pitch, it is at a bass level. The image of right down the dam, gross bellied frogs were cocked on swords. So cocked on swords conveys that they are alert and ready to spring, while the phrase loose necks pulsed like snakes. So he's kind of describing the adult frog in great detail, the way their bodies are there ready to kind of attack. Already he has used the word invaded. So everything is about aggression, is the dominant mood in the second stanza as far as those angry frogs are concerned. So cocked on swords suggests that they are alert and ready to attack, while the phrase loose necks pulse like sails suggests their necks are very flexible. That's how the adult frogs are. No? The necks are very flexible and they kind of jump very, very quickly. So these lines, according to the poet, are representing the darker side of nature. Like this is aggression. He was used to a more friendly kind of a flag stamp. So they kind of fill the speaker with a lot of fear, with a lot of disgust, and he's kind of understanding and coming to terms with this side of nature, which is a little dark. It's no longer the beautiful and wonderful and fascinating sights that he used to see before. Some hopped the way the frogs hop. The slap and plop were obscene threats. The slap and plop, this is onomatopoeia as a poetic device being used. The sound created by the frogs, it has been used as words itself. The slap and the plop were obscene threats. There is nothing nicety about it. There's nothing nice about it. Some sat poised like mud grenades, their blunt heads farting. Now, farting is the release of gas from the body. Mud grenades is small round mud balls. So he's describing grenades, again going with the word invading, talking about aggression and attack. So what does it convey? That they are dangerous and they're also threatening. The word mud grenades being used. Okay, so he has kind of used words out here which kind of convey that the entire demeanor, the appearance and the movement of the frogs is anything but nice. Is kind of the entire body language and the movement is very repulsive and looks extremely disgusting and dangerous. Okay. Then slap and plop, I've already told you. What does he do? I sickened. Means he felt very sick seeing this kind of an invasion. He turned and ran. The great slime kings were gathered there for vengeance, and I knew that if I dipped my hand in the spawn would clutch it. So he's saying that he's sick, he felt sick, he ran away because he's extremely scared and intimidated. The fact that the frogs have gathered there for vengeance suggests that they are a threat to the speaker. I knew that he says, if I dip my hands into the water, the spawn would clutch it. It suggests that the speaker is afraid of being contaminated by the frogs or being attacked by the frogs, right? By the frog spawn will clutch it. So, the frog spawn, what he would normally collect, but now he feels that they would be there and he feels that it is revenge. What could it be revenge for? Maybe for the fact that he had collected so many frog spawn in the past and taken it and put them into a bottle, right? So he had almost kind of arrested them. So maybe it is a revenge for what he had done earlier with the spawn. So symbolically, the frogs are being associated with death and decay, the fact that the way they are reacting, and the speaker's reaction to these angry frogs means that even in the midst of life, there is always the threat of death. There is the presence of death. So the poem in that sense ends on a very ominous kind of note. It's not a very happy note on which the poem ends, and it kind of moves away from the time of innocence to the time of, you are more aware of what is happening, and therefore the stanza language in the second stanza is much more, it kind of disturbing. We don't like what you have read in the second stanza. The first stanza, at least there was something pleasant about it. The innocence part was much more in the face. The second stanza is about you feeling scared and intimidated and threatened by these angry frogs. And that's how the poem ends, because the poet wants you to understand that what you see in the beauty of innocence of childhood is not there when you grow up. Life is, and the world is much more difficult, threatening, intimidating, all at the same time, even disgusting at times. So in terms of poetic devices, he has used quite a few. There is the metaphor of the daddy frog, the mommy frog, making them feel like they are menacing figures. The flex stamp giving this kind of, the image of a very stagnating, decaying kind of a place. Like snails, like mud grenades, wherever you find the word like or as, that means it's a simile which has been used. Imagery, I've already spoken about in great detail. Personification, the loose necks, the frogs are almost made to seem like human beings. It's almost like personification. Alliteration also I have told you. And hyperbole, great slime kings and mud grenades. Slime kings means they're slimy kind of creatures. They're not something which are very friendly and pleasant looking creatures. And mud grenades, it's an exaggeration because it shows the heightened emotions of the speaker, because he's very scared that mud grenades, like they are all coming there to overpower him and attack and invade the entire place. So that's as far as this particular poem is concerned. As I said, looks simple, not as simple, but if you break it down and understand the themes and what is being done in the first stanza, second stanza, and use all the kind of words which I have used in the notes, and of course it will be there in your question and answers also, you will find it easy to deal with this particular poem. Okay, tata, bye bye, thank you very much.